The Dancing with Depression podcast is brought to you by CAS-CM, where CM stands for Content Matters, because content brings people together. What if the greatest obstacle to healing isn't what you're carrying, but believing you have to carry it alone? Welcome to the Dancing with Depression podcast. I'm your host, Adam Turner. Today's conversation explores vulnerability, not as weakness, but as one of the most courageous things we can do. We discuss why opening up can feel so difficult, what keeps us silent, and how honest conversations can strengthen relationships, improve our mental health, and remind us that healing often begins with simply saying what matters. Here's our conversation. Joining me today is Dr. Oren Matteson. Oren is a licensed therapist whose work has centered around helping people navigate some of life's most challenging experiences, including trauma, addiction, relationships, emotional health, and personal growth. Through that work, he's gained a unique perspective on what helps people connect, heal, and move forward, and what often gets in the way. I'm excited to have him here because today we're diving into a topic that sits at the heart of so many mental health conversations: vulnerability. Oren, thank you for being here.
Hey, Adam. Great to see you.
Thank you. It's good to see you too. So I do want to, before we jump into the conversation, can you tell listeners just like maybe a little bit more about yourself and the work that you do? And then just a slight introduction to the most recent project that you're working, Saying What Matters.
Yeah, for sure. So I started in the work of mental health back in 2000 and was very passionate about working with people that had different kind of emotional struggles. And that takes us up to today. I haven't had too many jobs. I've kind of stayed in one job for a while where I worked with kids with pretty significant trauma and behavioral challenges in a higher level of care, like a hospital level, where there was a lot of major aggression and suicidality. And then in 2008, I joined Millennium Counseling as a new clinician. And about 7 years ago, I took over with a colleague and have owned it since then. And, since I've been with Millennium, my work has been almost exclusively with men, which is a fascinating population to work with. And I feel like we're on the beginning edge of kind of really learning more about men and their mental health and their wellness journey. And yeah, it's been really cool to work with this group of people.
It's refreshing to hear you say that because I really do feel that that's the case, where I know a stigma has been attached and that men are, kind of classified as guarded and such. But I feel that that's opening up. I feel like there are breakthroughs that are happening. And so it's refreshing to hear that you kind of see that as well. I'm curious because you said like working with children and then kind of progressing to focusing on the men's, like what drew you towards helping the people navigate their different situations, whether it's the relationships, emotional health? Is that something that just kind of happened, or did you start to gravitate towards a certain segment outside of just the men?
Yeah, so my story into kind of realizing that I wanted to be a clinician and help in this way started back when I was 14 years old. So I got into therapy because my family was going through some challenges, and I got really lucky and got an amazing mentor who kind of paved the way for me. And so my passion early on was to kind of be that for other kids who had been through different challenges and kind of be somebody who could be in a support system for them and hopefully give them a similar experience that I had. And then what happened is when I joined Millennium, the opportunity was for me to start a child and adolescent practice.
Mm.
And what ended up happening was a bunch of men started coming in with different issues. And really kind of the way that I see it now, almost 20 years later, is and something that I did not expect to see happen was if I help dads be healthier, that's probably a better way to help the kids. And so
That's
rather than sending 13, 17-year-old kid into my office by themselves, I get to spend the time with the dad who really is going to make the most amount of influence. So that kind of has become a full circle thing where, this all started because I got great support from a male therapist. And now I get to help dads become best versions of themselves to then hopefully show up for their kids in the best way they can.
that is awesome. I had not thought of it from that perspective, but that is great. That is
Yeah.
great. One of the things that we kind of talked about is, I had asked if we could kind of hone in a little bit on a specific topic because I know we could go off on a variety of topics, but vulnerability was something that I wanted to take a closer look at and
Yeah.
get your insight and perspective from the work that you've done. So, when I was looking at this, looking back, most people have applied for a job or they've asked somebody on a date, admitted a mistake, probably not as often as we should, maybe started a new career or taken some sort of a risk. Would you consider those acts to be vulnerable? Or are you showing vulnerability in those acts?
Mm. So there's such a wide range, Adam, of vulnerability. It really is the thing that makes you tight in your chest, right? It makes you second guess. And so for some people, it is putting themselves out there in a relationship or changing career paths or quitting a sport, and that's all they've known, right? Or what so it can be a lot of things. I feel like in the work that I do, it tends to be way more about like secrets, like the depth of secrets that people are keeping within themselves,
Mm.
centered around their pain and centered around kind of kind of more emotional and psychological distress.
And I
Um,
think
yeah.
yeah, I think the emotional and psychological component, like, I feel like we could classify those examples as being a level of vulnerable, but I think once the emotional and psychological, because I share this a lot, like, what we say to ourselves when we're by ourselves is the loudest thing that we hear, and so that can play a part in what we're willing to share out loud with someone else. And so I guess the reason why I asked that is I wanted to kind of explore more of what it's like to be vulnerable, the pros and the cons, right? So what happens when we are vulnerable and we are comfortable sharing? What does that look like? Have you seen that in the work that you've done where maybe somebody was hesitant, but then a change occurred and they were willing to share more with you?
So I could go to a lot of different ways with this, Adam, but I like to start with just more talking about me, right? Instead of a theoretical person, right? So a good example for me is a bunch of years ago, I just noticed I was sleeping less, I was more irritable, and I, just kind of needed to look at what was the surrounding issues that was causing this. And I remember coming home from work and I told my wife, I said, I am tapped out. I am super stressed. I am overwhelmed. And I just need you to know, like, I don't think there's anything you can do to fix it. I don't think there's anything you can do to kind of like alleviate it, but I just need to know where I'm at. And within a half an hour, all of those physical symptoms went away. And so there was a risk. She could have not heard me. She could have told me, do it better or, get over it. She could have done anything to not validate that experience. But what ended up happening was she couldn't fix it. She couldn't do anything about it, but she said that that's really hard. I know you had a lot on your plate and to be honest, that was the work that I do with men in action
Mm.
in my life. And and so yeah, I have lots of examples of that with guys that I work with. And something happened a few years ago. I was sitting with a client and I never thought about it or said it this way before, but I said to the effect of like vulnerability, or if I'm doing my job well, you're able to say out loud the things that you haven't been able to say.
Mm.
And you kind of brought that up earlier, right? Which is our inner monologue, the things we tell ourselves when no one's around. And that I feel like is probably the main part of my work is to say the things that are trapped inside because of stigma or shame or fear. And I have lived experience to know that when that comes out, a lot of things get better. And I can
So
tell you
true.
hundreds and hundreds of stories of where that's the case with people I'm working with, where it comes out. And in a lot of cases, especially around addiction, there is a period of time where things are really challenging because it's hard to hear some things that have been trapped inside. And then the getting better process happens. So,
Mm. And I think the getting better process is where people wanna get to. But I've gotta play the opposite side because this is reality. And what happens if and when somebody demonstrates vulnerability, but it's not embraced or accepted the way that you shared, where because you were vulnerable and your wife was accepting of what was going on. But if somebody experiences the flip side, which is they've opened themselves up and then it's not met with acceptance or acknowledgement or affirmation, what kind of challenges does that hold for that person moving forward? And is there a way to break through? I know there is, but like, what does that look like? Because
yeah,
have you experienced that side as
of course I
okay?
have.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and I realize that I sit in a very interesting place that most people don't sit, where all day long I hear people's deep, dark secrets. So that shapes a lot of where I come from when I'm talking. So I get that. But if we think of me and my wife, she is her own nervous system. She is her own emotional regulatory system separate than me. And so if I say something that makes her angry, sad, anxious, frustrated, scared, whatever it is, she's going to have an immediate reaction to my vulnerability that is not necessarily the end of the story. It is a reaction.
Mm.
And so what I've found with so many people is the initial reaction is normally this kind of internal instinctual like fear or insecurity, and then what comes after that is the empathy. And so yes, like if you were to kind of like zoom out over a period of time of somebody's life, kind of in the middle of being more open. Yeah, it's definitely not like some kind of kumbaya, "Oh, yeah, God, yeah," every like, you know, big hugs and kisses and, "Oh, yeah, this is amazing," right? But we have to realize that our vulnerability isn't necessarily about the other person's acceptance. It's that inside of us, if we keep it a secret, we are not healthy. And that kind of gets to this other side where I feel like I have a little bit of a skewed or a kind of a unique perspective, which is if I have to keep a secret so big in order to keep our relationship together, in order to keep you happy, in order to keep you okay with me, then what does that say about our relationship?
Mm.
So Yes, if we are doing things in a private life that our spouse doesn't know about, can that be extremely painful? Absolutely. But in general, in my experience, it creates this kind of initial wave of like fear and concern, but then it kind of now you're transitioning more into the next phase, which is kind of the healing and figuring it out part.
That's a really interesting perspective when you were talking about, like, the initial reaction, because they don't know what is like, you're sharing something with them, and it's not about the initial reaction, it's about, I think, what happens afterwards, like you said, and what I was thinking about when you said that was, and someone may have been vulnerable in the past with someone else, but that what you're saying is more about what the individual that's carrying it needs to release and share. And so don't focus so much on what in another time or another person you might have shared something with. It's about what the individual needs. So for me, when I'll use, yeah, I think you make a great point. It's easier sometimes to talk in our experiences. I had gotten to a point where I needed to address the depression and anxiety that I was dealing with and how it was affecting other people. Where I found relief was knowing that by sharing that, someone else might be able to relate and open up. And it wasn't about me having to bottle it up or hold it in any longer. It was about being free to share it. Now, I had been in situations years ago where I didn't feel that I could do that because maybe the person or the time of my life at that time, I was afraid of, the reaction or something that might affect my career or something like that. So am I picking up a little bit as far as who you share it with is important, but not as important as me, the individual, releasing it?
I think the releasing it is the bigger part. Now, if you have close people in your life that if they know, then you're not alone in those relationships, right? Or you're not kind of dealing with it, then I think there's a lot of value to that. Brene Brown talks about kind of earning the right to hear your story. And so I feel like there are people in all of our lives who have earned the right to hear our more painful sides, our more struggle sides. And it doesn't have to be outside of those, people that have shown their ability to earn your trust. But yeah, it's definitely on the if it's no longer just inside of me, it's out there. Yeah, that's really when a lot of the relief happens.
Do you feel like the position in work that you do, do you would you say that you find people are more open to be vulnerable with you as opposed to maybe before they've worked with you in general, meaning like where you're at in their process? Because I'm
Mhm.
thinking of, I know nothing about anything. I'm not talking to anybody. I'm just experiencing something. Everything tells me I should be guarded because if I open myself up, I risk XYZ. And the example I give is, when I was talking with Mark, retired Marine, you know, they would go or come back from a mission or whatever, and they had options for people to be able to talk to somebody about what they've just experienced
Mhm.
in the military. But a lot of folks wouldn't because they didn't want other people to see that maybe they were experiencing something. And so they were less vulnerable to share information. Where you're at, people are kind of aware of what you do, how you can help, and so on. So have they accepted that they want or are willing to be vulnerable, and it's just a matter of how vulnerable that they're willing to be with regards to the when you're seeing them?
Yeah, well, to go to your kind of military example, I feel like that population, the traditional talk therapy model of sit down on a chair or a couch in my room and talk about the things that are hard is not necessarily a model that I feel like is the most effective unless they're further down the path and they're kind of, trying to really process the past. But within, hours or days or weeks of things like that happening, there's other modalities that I feel like are way more helpful for that population. People have lied to me. People probably lie to me every day, withhold things, not intentionally. It's just because they just are guarded or have something between themselves and wanting the outside world to know something. And that's totally okay. You and I have those things. We all have those things. But I like the phrase, you know, you can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, right? For me, I love the role of making people thirsty.
That's
So the way that I do that is by really trying to strip away the stigma, the fear, the interpretations, the expectations. It, I really try to really break it down very simply with people. Yes, it may be painful to look at different parts of your life that you haven't wanted to look at or talk about, but it's not leaving this room.
hmm,
It doesn't mean anything that you may think it means, that I'm going to call somebody or I'm going to make you do something. It doesn't mean any of that. All it means is the power of saying something that you've kept within yourself out loud. And so that I like trying to make people thirsty so that they can drink the water and get the benefit that I've experienced, sounds like you've experienced, of saying hard things and getting to some relief.
I freaking love that positioning. It's not, "I'm gonna force you to drink," because we all know that that's not gonna work, but to make them thirsty, that is very, very cool. And I think that kind of ties into, the environment that you provide, which is somebody feeling safe, right? And so what does that role look like? The kind of combination of safety and vulnerability, right? Do you feel that creating that safe space brings out the vulnerability? And is that essentially the goal that well, let me ask, what are you trying to establish when somebody is first working with you?
Sure. You've probably heard of like CBT or DBT or other things. So those are like theoretical modalities that therapists can utilize. I am really drawn to a relational model where it's really about the relationship. And so when I'm sitting with people, I'm sitting with them as if they're a human being, just like I'm a human being. There's no hierarchy. There's no, I'm here to fix you, or you have a problem and you're broken and I'm going to be part of, like, it's just two people in a room. And so for me, that's really helped develop rapport that goes both ways, right? Like, I'm earning their trust, they're earning my trust. I'm sharing things about my experience because I'm a human being and I've gone through things and experienced things, and they're a human being and they've experienced stuff. And so anyway, like that I feel like that's my style, and that's just been a thing that's worked for me to help people kind of see the benefit of opening up, being vulnerable, and being more honest with themselves than maybe they have ever been.
Yeah, I think I can speak that I feel that here. Like, we just had a situation where things didn't go exactly the way we thought. It's not a big deal. It was a technical difficulty, challenge, setback, but not once did I feel that it bothered you. And I can see how that could resonate in a variety of different formats where when you're just sitting down and talking to somebody. And I like I like the positioning of that with just relationship and kind of building that rapport. What becomes possible because of that? Because I think one of the things that I like to address or focus on or look at is what can happen from someone putting the work in. And I don't mean it like, in a bad way. It's just you got to put the work in. Like you're going to talk about some things, you've got to identify things, but there's another side. There's a place we're trying to get to. What is possible when people are willing to have those conversations and share information that they have not shared in the past with anybody else?
Well, if you're an athlete, right, and you have an injury, you're not able to operate as a someone that's performing the task, right, of the skills that you have to do for your. And I would say the same is true for our mental health for as human beings. If we have different injuries that are happening within us, we're not operating in the best way as a human, and that may be at work or as a dad or as a friend or as a partner. And so, if those things matter to you, right? Like if you want to be a good dad, if you want to be a good, from an optimal perspective, then yeah, those are things that are all possible because like the things that I hear from people are, I'm really just not taking care of myself in the best way, which is making it really hard for me to live a good life.
Mm,
And whether it's I'm more kind of pulled away because of kind of I'm anxious, or I'm not engaging in life because I'm depressed, or I'm keeping a lot of secrets because of an addiction. I'm more irritable because I'm lying a lot and I don't feel good about myself, whatever it is. I mean, that these are all things that are playing out that are impacting the important elements of our life. And let alone physical health. I mean, like so many people talk about different medical challenges that they have as a result of not taking care of their mental health. And so yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of positive things come out of beginning and continuing down the path of just of sharing what's going on the inside.
for sure. And you mentioned earlier on a scenario where you were carrying some things and you shared with your wife. Would you consider that to be kind of like starting the process of I use the word healing, but sometimes it's understanding, but what was it that led you to finally share that with her? Because it sounded like you were carrying some things that you weren't feeling well, but you said after you shared it with her, you kind of felt that release. So what led you to finally put that out there?
Yeah. So I think what happened, for more context, was COVID and other work scenarios really kind of created a greater disturbance within my wife than I think I thought was going to happen, and I definitely knew no like different than what she thought was going to happen. And so I think she started struggling more, and as a result, I just started to take on more. And so for me coming home that day and saying what it was kind of in direct relationship with, hey, you haven't been able to get to as much. I've been getting to them and I'm really tired and I need you to know that. And instead of me coming in and saying, you're not doing this, you're not doing that, it's killing me, what I did was I made it about me and how I was doing. And I feel like that's one big differentiator that I talk with a lot of guys. There's a what and there's a how.
Mm,
And when we focus on the how, it's way more relational. It's way more connecting. And and it just took me a while to realize that like how I was doing was really impacted with all the different kind of what's that I had kind of taken on. And I knew she was still struggling. So it wasn't like somehow the balance was going to go back to 50-50 or as some people say, 100, 100. But however, whatever the math works out for you, like I knew it wasn't going to happen, but I kind of put my head down. I took care of things to kind of support her and everything else that was going on. And I think she knew at that point that like it had kind of, it all kind of came to a head and that we needed to talk about it. And so that from a doing the work perspective, yeah, I mean, I think that is being honest about how hard things are in a relationship, in a job, in our lives, can be a really kind of connecting thing in a relationship if you do it in a way that supports the relationship. And I just happen to, you know, have done a lot of therapy myself and be in the profession to kind of know how to do that relationally pretty well. But yeah, that was the kind of the context around that.
Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. Something else you had mentioned in the very beginning was, kind of seeing a little bit more of a breakthrough or kind of with regards to men's mental health specifically. Is there anything I know as I'm asking the question, I'm like, no, there is not one specific thing. What are you seeing that may be attributing to that opening up where men are maybe breaking that stigma a little bit more and are willing to reach out? I know there's always a lot of work to be done, but it I definitely felt it. You've kind of alluded to it, and obviously the work that you do would support that. Is there anything or certain things that you're seeing that are contributing to that movement?
Yeah. This is a whole nother conversation, but I'll give
Okay.
you a little snippet. Okay.
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 We're setting it up.
Okay. Great. And I'm happy to come back and talk about this specific thing because I think it's a big deal.
Okay.
Is I think in the last 20 to 25 years, the role that men play in society and in relationships have changed. And I think we are now being tasked with not just being providers and being safety builders, but being emotional beings in a different way. We are showing up differently as dads, we're showing up differently as friends. Our partners are women are looking for partners that have higher emotional intelligence because they want that connectivity. And so I think I don't want to say it's because of women, but I think it's because the way that our species are interacting with each other, that we are being kind of like demanded to grow in this area to exist differently in relationships. And so I think that is a big motivator. I think that matriculates out in a lot of other ways. But I think at the core, I think we're being asked to do things that I don't think we've ever been asked ever before, and from an evolution perspective, and it's bumpy. I mean, men are like not great at the things that women have been practicing for centuries, millennia. Like it's so again, it's like women have been practicing it, we haven't. Now we're somehow being tasked with, well, you're a human, so you should be able to do it, but we do not have the training. So anyway, like I said, I feel like it's part of a bigger conversation, but that's really where I feel like at the core, a lot of this change has come is we have to show up differently in the world and we have to really learn how to do it.
I could not agree more that it is definitely something we need to talk more about because the way that you position that is very I'm connecting. And I think that it's not about blame, it's not about whatever, it's about just as things evolve, we have to evolve with it. And some of us don't know how to evolve. It actually kind of goes back to, what you were talking about where you're working with the fathers and the fathers having an impact on the younger generation. I feel like that could be applied here as well, which is, you know, if we're learning from that group that was in the middle of the transition or before the transition, they had their defined roles and that was kind of where they were at. Well, as it moves forward, you can't teach somebody something you don't know. And so anyways, we'll save that. We'll table that
Well,
because
and
that
I mean, I have countless examples of guys that come in for recovery and, and then, 6 month mark, a year month mark, year, 2 years out, we're talking about, hey, how can I talk to my son about how I kept everything in as a kid and how that led to my demise around these issues, right? Sure, I made money or sure I accomplished whatever, but like underneath it all, like here's all of the struggles. And now like they're using their challenges and kind of their triumphs and recovery to help their 15, 20, 25, 30-year-old kids.
yeah, yeah, I could definitely see that connection. As far as uh, someone who's listening to this today, if it was up to you, if they could only remember one thing, and I know we covered a lot of good stuff,
Yeah.
but they could only like take away one thing from today's conversation, what would you like it to be?
Well, you asked me earlier about the saying what matters, that project I'm working on. Inside of all of us are things that are really important. Proofs about ourselves, about our experiences, about where we're at. And if we keep those in, most likely our life is going to just have more struggle to it. And if we think about saying it or bringing other people into the things that matter in our lives, then those things become less challenging. And now we have more people on our team that know us better, which just strengthens those relationships.
That yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate that. This is kind of a part that I've incorporated and kind of as we wrap up,
Yeah.
I like to give you the opportunity to ask me a question. Can be
Oh,
about
okay.
anything, but I've limited it to one.
Okay.
So if you've got something, fire away and do my best.
Okay. What was the most uncomfortable thing about our conversation today?
Wow. Most uncomfortable.
Or thing you were most resonate with?
I think the easier one is to resonate with when you talked about sharing with your wife something that had been heavy for you and then feeling that relief or release after you were able to share it. I feel that Bobby is incredible at allowing me to share what I need to share, not being judgmental. It's not that there aren't things that, she doesn't, it's not like she's not reacting at all, right? But I know that even with the reaction, I can still share it with her and we can work through it, right? I will answer because I think it's important to have both sides. Like, as far as the most uncomfortable, I like to be myself, like to be candid. I quickly realized that I did not need prompts because I have a process and I can see how you are successful. We have not spoken to each other before except for communications via email back and forth.
Maybe
And
3 emails, maybe.
th-
Maybe
three,
maybe
yeah,
4, maybe.
yeah. And two of them were to confirm,
Yeah, the time.
today type of
Yep.
thing.
Mhm.
I don't think people will be able to see it on my face, but I feel like I've known you for a long time and I feel that it's just a instant connection where I see a lot, not a lot. I see some things in myself that you shared. And so I didn't know what to expect. So the uncomfortable part was, I try not to do a lot of research. I don't want to know everything about you. I want to, you know, get it as it's coming type of deal. So the uncomfortable part was I was going down I thought I was going to go down one direction. I didn't go down that direction, and I'm glad I didn't. So those are the two things. The the one thing I will also ask, well, I guess from here I'll officially say I hope we get an opportunity to connect again.
Yeah,
I
for
think
sure.
that, yeah, I think there's some things that you have mentioned and I think are incredibly beneficial for others to hear, and I would love to be a part of that process for sure. Oren, thank you so much for sharing your insights, your personal stories, and for me, I want people to know, that they can check you out in a couple of different manners, right? There's the Millennium Counseling Center podcast, as well as what you had mentioned. You're doing a mini series podcast named Saying What Matters. And I know that that's just started. I've seen several episodes. I've listened to all of them. And I don't just say that to say it because I said, there's a connection and kind of what the work that you're doing and the gentleman that you do the podcast with. Could you give him a quick shout out? Because,
Yeah, Rasan. Yeah,
Hassan.
Rasan and I are great friends. He was in corporate America forever, and he needed to pivot, and he's now on this other journey of kind of in the helping profession. And so he and I talked a few months ago about ways that I could help support him, and because he's just starting out, right? I've been doing this, a long time now, and he's like, "Well, let's just like talk and record it." I'm like, "Great," and it kind of as from there, it's just kind of turned into this other thing, and yeah, it's really cool to hear how he is supporting people, and he kind of lives all around the world. So I mean, he is in kind of like the Vietnam area. He's in Colombia, South America sometimes. Like he's all over. So I'm just so happy to do it. And similarly, Adam, like when I sit down and talk to him, like we've had friendship for 20 years, but now we're actually
Yeah.
talking like about real stuff. And so it's so great. I love it.
It is a very cool dynamic, very, very cool dynamic. And so I encourage people to check that out for sure. Until next time, thank you again so much
Thanks, Adam.
for your time, and we'll definitely reconnect.
Awesome.
There are moments in conversations where someone says something and you almost wish you could see the words appear in bold. That happened to me today when Oren said, "For me, I love the role of making people thirsty." The more I thought about it, the more I realized that's true in so many areas of life, not just mental health. I remember being in a relationship that, looking back, wasn't healthy. After it ended, several of my closest friends admitted they had been worried for a long time. Naturally, I asked why they never told me. Their answer surprised me. They told me that in their own relationship experiences, whenever they'd try to convince someone that a relationship wasn't healthy, it usually had the opposite effect. People would dig in, defend the relationship, and stay even longer. They say sometimes the most loving thing you can do is offer support, be present, and trust that they'll recognize it when they're ready. That conversation has stayed with me for years. Whether it's asking for help, leaving a relationship, changing careers, or simply admitting we're struggling, people rarely move because they're told to. They move when something inside them shifts. So I'll leave you with a question. Can you think of a time when you tried to convince someone to do something they weren't ready to do? How did that work out? Maybe the better question is, how can we create the kind of environment that helps people become curious enough, safe enough, or maybe even thirsty enough to discover the answer for themselves? Until next time, thank you for listening. And when it comes to saying it out loud, remember to take the lead. Ever heard the saying, "It takes a village to raise a child"? Well, same applies here. It takes an awesome audience like you to help get this message in front of someone who needs to hear they're not alone. That's why I ask for your continued support. Whether you like, share, follow, or leave a review, and if so inclined, can donate, it all helps more than you know. If something resonated, pass it along. You never know who needs it. Want to connect? Email me anytime. dancingwithdepression@yahoo.com. And remember, when it comes to depression, take the lead. Content and safety notice. Dancing with Depression may include discussions of suicide, self-harm, trauma, and emotional distress. Listeners' discretion advised. This podcast shares personal experiences and is not a substitute for professional mental health care. If you need immediate support, call or text 988, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. For non-crisis help and resources, contact NAMI at 1-800-950-6264.